Mama Murdered a Podcast. I'm your host, AB.
And this week on Mama Murdered a Podcast, I'm a day late and a dollar short again, but this time it kind of wasn't my fault. I woke up yesterday and I could not breathe through either side of my nose, and it sounded like I was talking through my nose. It was really bad. I started to record. Once I played back the first 3 minutes, I was like, absolutely not. We are not doing this. So, instead, I figured I would just do it today. And I had something a little bit different in mind anyways for the week of Halloween. So this week, I just went online. I found some really freaky, crazy, spooky, paranormal, just spooky in general Reddit stories. All of these stories, I will have them linked below so you can go read the comments or, find the story yourself. But with all that being said, and without further ado, let's get it. This first story is from Reddit user Michelle Rose 23, and it goes as follows. This started when I was at a childhood friend's apartment for what was supposed to be a fun little movie night. We hadn't hung out in a while, and we were catching up. Her place was cozy, a little disorganized, and full of girly decor. We were in our comfiest sweatpants, about to watch princess movies. Her apartment isn't the most tidy, things are a bit scattered around, but it's clean and so authentic, which always made me feel at home. We decided on ordering pizza for dinner. She mentioned that Sherwood, someone I hadn't met yet, would bring the pizza over. At first, I was not happy to hear that. I thought that meant that she had invited another friend, a boy, over to join us, which wasn't what I had in mind, but I was in for a surprise. Sherwood turned out to just be our delivery guy for the night. He wasn't joining us. When he got to the apartment, there was an awkward air about him, and he was obviously nervous, fumbling a bit with the pizza boxes, and not quite making eye contact. My friend introduced us quickly, and it was clear from her overly thankful demeanor that Sherwood did a lot more for her than just fetch dinner. After handing us the pizza, there was a brief moment of forced small talk. My friend was super nice to him despite his awkwardness. He wasn't the best conversationalist and seemed really out of place. Then Sherwood asked for my number. I was in a tough spot because our mutual friend was sitting right there, so I just gave it to him. Yeah, we chatted for maybe 5 minutes before my friend gave him the cue to leave with something like, "Thanks so much for dropping this off." He seemed to get the hint. We both gave him a hug before my friend said something like, "Drive safe," giving him another cue to leave. When I asked my friend what that was all about, she basically explained that Sherwood was her unpaid personal assistant. He did her grocery shopping, he dropped off pizza, and he did all this other stuff. I think Sherwood was just a really lonely guy, desperate for interaction, especially female interaction. My friend and I were both young and immature back then. We were about 23, but I think we both knew something was seriously wrong with Sherwood. It was a little hard to articulate because we couldn't point out exactly what his problem was. Sherwood started a group chat with my friend and me, and he just sent a meme or two every week. I felt like he was trying to stay relevant without being intrusive. Maybe he was used to being sidelined or even blocked by other girls in the past. It felt like he was trying to make me remember him, but also carefully trying to not give me a reason to block him. I can't speak on my behalf, that's just what it felt like. Sherwood also offered help with errands. The first time, I said thanks for asking, but no. He asked every weekend after that. One day, I made the mistake of accepting his help. I knew better. I had recently found a great deal for a new washing machine on Craigslist, but I had no idea how to pick it up and install it. When I mentioned it in the chat, Sherwood excitedly volunteered to take care of the whole thing. He handled the whole pickup and installation like a total champ, which saved me so much hassle. I tried to pay him for his effort because I wanted to show appreciation, but he wouldn't accept any money. I insisted. Eventually, he suggested that I could repay him by joining him for a hike. Like what? I was uneasy about this. It felt a bit too personal, and almost like it could be mistaken for a date. But Sherwood framed it as nothing more than a friendly outing, like a transaction to balance out the favor. I agreed to the hike. I rationalized it by telling myself that it was a fair trade for installing the washing machine, and that it was genuinely a form of payment. Especially since I didn't think he had too many friends. This hike felt like maybe a way for him to have some companionship. I thought it might be nice helping him. Part of me was still uneasy about spending time with him in such an isolated setting. And then the day of the hike, Sherwood picked this trail that was nearby. I had been there before. It's gorgeous. As we walked along together, he chatted about ordinary things like work, the weather, and his hobbies. Everything seemed normal until he suggested that we go off the main path to see something, quote-unquote, special that he wanted to share. Like, what could that even mean? We reached this secluded spot, and there, oh my gosh, was a dead body. My heart pounded so violently as Sherwood stood there, so eerily calm and nonchalant. The casualness in his demeanor made me feel even more uneasy. It felt like he wasn't just showing me a dead body, but also revealing this darker side of himself. It smelled bad, but not like in the movies. I don't know how long it had been there. I'm not a biologist. But my guess is that it had smelled a lot worse before, but now it had gone down. At that moment, I mumbled some excuse about needing to get back quickly and started walking briskly towards the main path. I was urging Sherwood to follow me. I thought maybe this was some twisted mind game, like a way to intimidate me or show me that he wasn't just some quote-unquote harmless little boy. Maybe he was trying to send a message that said, "You should know I'm familiar with things like this." Oh, and I guess there's another possibility. Maybe he just wanted me to think about him more. Sometimes when I talk to people, I feel like they only notice me for the time that we're together, and then they won't think of me again until the next time we meet. It's possible Sherwood felt that way with me, and maybe he thought showing me a dead body would make him less forgettable. I have no idea. But on the surface, he seemed oblivious to how inappropriate this was. As we walked back together, I was in full flight or fight mode, instinctively looking around to see if there were any other hikers or rangers, anyone who could make me feel like I wasn't alone. The moment I spotted someone else on the trail, I called out. Not to expose Sherwood, but just to ask for directions back to the parking area. I wanted to make sure Sherwood and I wouldn't be left alone together, and I asked this gentleman to walk us back to the parking lot. I wasn't taking no for an answer. I kept pretending like I was confused about his directions, and eventually he agreed to just walk us there. Getting help from that guy was my way of re-anchoring myself to safety and normality while I was still under the shock of what Sherwood had shown me. We got to the parking area. There, I called my friend, I told her that I was with Sherwood, and I suggested that he could drop me off with her, and that we'd be there in about 20 minutes. Sherwood agreed. This was my way of making sure that if anything happened, it was on record that Sherwood was the last person to have been with me. Also, I immediately texted my friend what happened to get that on record too. When I got to her apartment, we said thanks to Sherwood and kindly told him to go away. I had already told her through text, but then I started going into all the detail. The fact that the body had insects, the fact that the face was decomposing but still not recognizable, etc. Her reaction was pure horror. Not just about the dead body, but also how nonchalantly Sherwood had treated the whole situation. She confessed that she'd always sensed something was off with him, even though she'd never imagined anything this disturbing. We both agreed that we needed to remove Sherwood from our lives. She admitted she felt stuck and she had become too reliant on Sherwood to just fire him cold turkey. We planned out how we would do it. It was this gradual phasing out plan. We would limit our interactions to times where others were present, we would slowly reduce our responses to his text, and I would never ask for his help again. My friend would also ask for less and less help. Sherwood kept texting during weekends, offering to run errands or asking if we needed anything, to which my friend would reply, "I'm trying to work on being more independent, but you've really been such a help." Eventually, as my friend started dating someone new, she introduced Sherwood to her boyfriend. Sherwood never contacted her after that. I had called the cops the same night of the incident, but it was a while before we heard any more news about it, at least a full month later. A news report confirmed discovering a dead body in the area where Sherwood had taken me hiking. They made an arrest, not of Sherwood, but of this other guy that Sherwood followed on Instagram. I have no idea if Sherwood was connected to the murder. Reflecting on everything, I think there's one clear moral of the story. trust your instincts. This second story comes from Reddit user Lithodora, I believe. Lithodora. When I was younger, we frequently visited my grandparents around holidays, even though we didn't live in the same town. My aunt lived 2 houses down from my grandparents. The lady in the house in between was creepy. She was a large woman, over 6 feet. She wore logging chains around her neck, a dress, and work boots. The only time I remember seeing her outside was either in her garden in the back or when she was washing the outside of her house. Scrubbing the actual building. She did this often. During these times, she would yell at us kids and call us all kinds of things. She would tell us that the devil would be coming for us, and the adults told us just to leave her alone and to avoid her. We would run the distance between my aunts and my grandparents because when you passed by, she was watching out the windows. It was creepy, and we never went alone. One Halloween, one of my cousins dared us to trick-or-treat her house. I remember how scared I was, but I didn't want to be a chicken. Plus, I was going to be with a group. One of us rang the doorbell, and there was lots of banging noises in the house suddenly, like the door slamming. When she answered the door, she had a severed head in her hand, and we all went screaming. The adults told us it was a Halloween prop, and we knew we shouldn't be bothering her, and we deserved to be scared. Well, about a month later, my parents got a phone call that the lady had tried to kill my aunt while she was bringing in groceries and had my young cousin in her arms. The lady had one of them rope saws and had come behind my aunt with it. She put it over her head and around her neck and proceeded to saw. My aunt naturally flipped and started kicking the door. My uncle came and beat the lady down with a fire poker. The police investigation revealed that the woman had been digging tunnels under her home, which were coming up under my aunt's, my grandparents', and another neighbor's house. She had been bringing the dirt up and putting it in the raised beds of her garden. She also had a shrine of some sort underground, which had a few severed heads around it. My aunt survived, by the way, but has a long scar across her neck. This next story comes from Reddit user YouWhoF, and it says, "This is my story about being stalked. Dealing with this has been difficult, and throughout the ordeal, I felt out of control. So I'm sharing this to gain control over my story." This story is long, as it spanned over 2 years, so I've split it into parts to make it easier to read through. Part 1. Several years ago, I moved abroad to begin a 2-year study course. When I arrived at my apartment, I met 3 of my roommates. Sam was funny and sarcastic, while Bella and Poppy were both nice, sorority-type girls. We decided to go out for dinner, and I offered to invite our 4th roommate in room 1C next to mine. Sam warned me not to invite her, saying that she was odd. I was worried because I didn't want to live with a bunch of catty girls. How were they fighting in less than a day? I smiled and told Sam that she had just made a bad first impression and I would invite her so we could get to know her. Sam grumbled as I left the kitchen, approaching the door next to mine. I knocked and the door opened. A short, petite girl with long brown hair and a childlike face stuck her head out. I introduced myself and invited her to dinner. The girl's face lifted at my invitation as she nodded in agreement. Our excitement about the new school year kept us lively as we arrived at the restaurant. I decided to befriend the girl in room 1C, since we were sharing a bathroom. I learned that her name was Nellie. We were the same age, from the same state, and in the same program. I ordered a Jack and Coke as Nellie leaned into me and asked if I actually drank alcohol. I nodded, thinking her question was odd. We were both in our 20s. Of course I drink alcohol. Nellie focused her attention on me while we ate. As I got to know Nellie, I kind of felt bad for her. She was born in Sri Lanka, but immigrated as a kid since she had an accent and a lisp. I assumed she was bullied. Nellie was different from me. She was shy and claimed to not have hobbies or friends, but I figured that, since we were in the same program, I could befriend her. I asked if she wanted to sit with me in class, and she happily agreed. I felt content knowing that I was befriending her like I was doing a good deed. Part 2. My first 2 weeks abroad went smoothly. I got used to my surroundings, I made friends, and I got along with my roommates. Sam, Bella, Poppy, and I would often cook and eat dinner together while chatting about our days. Nellie and I got along, but she was socially awkward. I made it my goal to befriend her, which was easy because we sat together in lecture every day. We even opened our bathroom doors in unison. I would open my door, then Nellie would open hers, and ask me where I was going. One night I left my room to go grocery shopping when Nellie's door opened and she asked if she could join me. I agreed and she hurriedly put her sandals and neon pink coat on. I walked through the aisles. Nellie silently followed closely behind me. Eventually, I found everything I needed, but Nellie said she wasn't buying anything. After I paid for everything, we began to exit the store and the alarms went off. I stopped to show the security guard my receipt and he looked in my bags, confirming that I had not stolen anything. I didn't think much of this incident, but when I stood at the front of the store with Nellie, for the 4th time as my bags were searched by security, a thought crept into my mind. The alarms had never rang when I was alone, or with my friends. They only rang when I was with Nellie. I shook my head. Nellie couldn't be stealing. I was with her the whole time. She was a perfectly nice, normal girl, and I was rude to think anything contrary. Part 3. The harmony in the apartment only lasted 2 weeks. One morning, I shuffled into the bathroom and saw that the toilet was completely filled with 2 or 3 rolls of dry, unraveled toilet paper spilling onto the floor. However, what concerned me the most was the huge wad of hair that sat directly on top of the toilet paper. I knew then that it was Nellie who had done this. She was the only person with a bathroom key, and her hair color was a match. I tried to think of any reason that Nellie would do this. Maybe she clogged the toilet, then stuffed it with toilet paper to hide her business, but that didn't explain the wad of hair. I couldn't harp on the issue, though, so I made the maintenance request to have someone unclog the toilet, and when I came home from class, the toilet was unclogged. I studied for 2 hours before going back into the bathroom. I was annoyed when I found the toilet clogged again. Toilet paper, hair, and all. This obviously wasn't a mistake anymore, and now we were out of toilet paper. I knew I had to say something, but I didn't want to directly confront Nellie about this awkward topic. So I sent a passive, non-aggressive text. Hey, if something goes wrong with the toilet, can you please make a maintenance request right away, please? I sent that message, careful not to make it accusatory. I didn't want there to be tension with Nellie, especially since she still sat with me in class. Nellie never acknowledged the situation. She still opened her door with mine, hung out with me, sat with me in class. For the next 2 months, I just dealt with the constant toilet paper and torn out hair. I tried sending more texts, but it didn't help. Nellie would clog the toilet, I'd make a maintenance request, a staff member would clean Nellie's mess, and then she would do it again. Eventually, after 12 clogged toilets, I was so annoyed that I decided to confront Nellie. Nellie, I know you're clogging the toilet and you need to stop. If you do it again, I'm going to report you. I pressed send and I walked to class. I decided that I wouldn't sit with Nellie anymore. I had different friends to sit with who didn't clog my toilet. As I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte, I felt bad seeing Nellie sit alone across the lecture hall. I promised myself that I'd still be friends with her, that everything would be fine. Part 4. I was happy that the holiday break was soon, and that Nellie never addressed me not sitting with her. My message had worked, Nellie stopped clogging the toilet, and we were still friends. But I came home one day in early December, and my nose scrunched in disgust. There was a sickly, sweet, rotten yogurt-like smell coming from Nellie's room. I didn't want to confront Nellie so soon after messaging her about the toilet, so for 2 weeks, I avoided the problem. I didn't address the issue until 2 weeks later, when all of our food started to rot almost immediately after buying it. Bella, Sam, and Poppy were complaining about how maintenance hadn't found the source of what was causing our food to rot when I brought up the horrible smell and an accompanying fly infestation. The girls went to go smell the hallway outside of Nellie's room and returned a minute later coughing and gagging. We posited about what may be causing the smell when Sam brought up seeing Nellie at 2 a.m. skipping through the woods. Sam was heading back from the club, and Nellie was skipping around like a possessed doll, according to Sam. As we spoke, Nellie entered the kitchen and everyone fell quiet. Sam bluntly asked Nellie what the smell in her room was, and Nellie just silently shrugged her shoulders. Annoyed by this, Sam stood up and grabbed Nellie's arm, guiding her into the hallway as the rest of us followed, covering our noses with our sleeves. Nellie claimed not to smell anything, but her eyes were darting rapidly between the three of us. Sam made a sarcastic comment towards Nellie as we returned to the kitchen without Nellie. Sam was a bit harsh, and part of me felt bad for Nellie. At least Christmas would be relaxing. I spent 2 weeks at a friend's house with her family for Christmas. They were all welcoming, so I didn't miss home too much. My friend knew about Nellie, so she brought me scented candles for Christmas. When I returned to my apartment, I felt rested and equipped to face the new year. Part 5. My January exams were online and pretty easy, so I was surprised when Nellie texted me asking if I would cheat with her on the final exam. I politely declined, and she asked if I would go to lunch with her the next day. I had no plan, so I accepted her invitation. I spent a lot of time with her, but she never actually spoke much, so despite everything, I wanted to get to know her better. Once we were at the restaurant, I racked my brain for things I could talk with Nellie about. Attempting to break the awkward silence, I asked what her favorite show was. Nellie told me that she loved to watch Sofia the First. I was confused. Sofia the First is a Disney toddler show that came out when we were teens. Why was she watching a show for toddlers in her 20s? I didn't know how to expand on what she said, so I changed the topic and asked what her favorite hobby was. Nellie giggled and said, "I do this a lot actually. I listen to you through the walls. They're so thin, I barely put my ear against it, and I hear you talk to your parents every day." I tried not to look horrified as I sat there confused and a little scared. Nellie started laughing. "You're like a mother, but I'm an aunt and we're sisters together." I smiled awkwardly and nodded. I had no clue how to respond. In a desperate attempt to change the topic, I asked about her childhood in Sri Lanka. Nellie slammed her fist on the table, sending my rice flying off the plate. Nellie yelled that she was not from Sri Lanka, and I apologized, even though she definitely told me she was from Sri Lanka. Nellie began to laugh again. "I have plans for us tonight. We'll go to the graveyard and walk around. You'll be scared, but I'll have fun with you." Nellie's eyes were opened incredibly wide, and her mouth seemed to be open more than usual. She was scaring me, and I didn't want to be rude, so I said I'd invite our other roommates too. At that, Nellie let go of her fork and quickly moved her hand onto mine. She insisted that we go alone. I pulled my hand back, attempting to hide my grimace, and stuttered out a distinguishing maybe. Nellie leaned back slowly, rolling her head from one side to the other, and mumbled about how fun it would be. The rest of our lunch was silent. When we got back to the apartment, I said goodbye to her and went to my room. I didn't call my parents that night. I went to bed early, hoping to quell my anxiety with some much-needed rest. Part 6. The next day I did laundry, went shopping, and by 2 p.m. I was meal prepping for the next week. I jumped when Nellie asked me to go to the movies with her. I hadn't heard her come into the kitchen, but there she stood, her head down and her eyes turned up staring at me. I declined her request, and she repeated her question. I politely declined once again, trying to offset her bizarre vibes. Nellie didn't respond and retreated back to her room, then left for the movies. An hour later, I went to the bathroom, and when I opened the door, I gagged immediately. The smell was bad, but the sight was worse. The walls, floors, door, sink, and toilet were covered in smeared poop and blood. I could see distinct handprints. I closed the door, trying not to puke. I was shocked that Nellie had done this, but my shock turned into anger as I messaged Nellie. "What you did is weird and disgusting. You need to clean it. I'm going to report you." I pressed send. I no longer cared about being friends with Nellie. I felt gross, so I went to our shower room next to the bathroom, but Nellie ruined that too. There was toilet paper shoved in the shower drains, and wads of toilet paper crusted onto the walls. I was livid at this point, but I had to wait until Monday to report her, so I laid down to take a nap. 2 hours later, I was awoken by Nellie slamming the front door. I heard her footsteps until her feet were visibly through the crack under my door. I expected her to knock, but she didn't. Instead, Nellie began continuously chirping like a bird. She paused briefly, then began twisting my doorknob in unison with her chirps. I stood there unnerved as Nellie did this for 5 minutes. Then Nellie began to rapidly knock on my door and call my phone. 7 times she called, hung up, then called again, while still rapidly knocking. Nellie then began to ram her body into the door over and over again. The shock of it made me stumble back into my bed. Then, as suddenly as it started, Nellie stopped. Her feet were still visible under my door. My phone buzzed and I slowly unlocked it, staring down at the horror at Nellie's text. The cockroach screamed. Why do this to me? Because you couldn't be positive in a negative situation, the doctor said. The doctor pulls off the cockroach legs and it cries. The doctor has no choice. The cockroach must be killed and its family taken away. You are the funny cockroach. I was terrified as Nellie began to knock and chirp. I was scared to call the cops because I was on a visa, and if they didn't believe me, I could be deported for making a false report. I texted Poppy and Bella, who had heard everything. Nellie stood there for an hour straight, occasionally pushing her fingers through the crack under my door. When Bella's boyfriend arrived, his presence scared Nellie away. We went up and talked about what happened before going to bed. That night, I barely slept. I was too scared. Part 7. I awoke the next day, anxious about the previous night's events. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't that bad. However, as I peeked into the bathroom, its condition suggested otherwise. Charlotte and Reagan were skipping class, so I sat alone. I saw Nellie enter the room, bypass her regular seat, weave through the aisles, and inspect each row as she passed. I sank in my chair as she got closer, horrified by the realization that she was searching for me. With the last night's memories fresh in my mind, I froze in fear when Nellie found me and robotically bent down to meet my eyeline as she sat next to me with her mouth twisted up in this sinister smile. I did nothing as she sat next to me, too scared to move and worried that any tiny shift may cause her to attack. When the professor dismissed us, I shot up, frantically packing my things. Nellie asked where I was going, and I lied to her saying that I was going to the cafe. I didn't want her to know where I was, so I went home for lunch, and as I stood in the kitchen, the door opened. You weren't at the cafe. Nellie's eyes darted up to me. She was looking at the knife on the table. I apologized and told Nellie my plans had changed. My heart raced as I asked if she liked the lecture. Nellie didn't respond. She just stared at me with her head tilted and her mouth agape. I asked again, but she still didn't answer. I faced her, afraid she'd use the knife on me. She glared so intently that her veins were protruding. She stood there for 10 minutes before leaving. Later on, I walked to the library and froze as I saw Nellie's pink jacket behind me. I turned to see Nellie staring at me with vacant eyes. She followed me into the library, up to the 3rd floor, and then sat directly behind me. With her threat still fresh in my mind, I moved to a different spot, but Nellie followed me. I tried again, but she still followed. I was scared to be isolated in the library with her, so I decided to leave. I quickly weaved through the bookshelves, desperately trying to reach the lobby, but Nellie matched my pace. I was nearing a heart attack when I ran into my guardian angel, Sam. Nellie's following me, I blurted out. Sam looked at Nellie, who had stopped 5 feet behind me. Sam nonchalantly told Nellie to fuck off, and I was surprised when Nellie did just that. After Sam and I spoke for a bit, my phone buzzed. It was Nellie, inviting me to the graveyard that night. Sam told me that I'd be smart to move out, and she was right. I needed to report Nellie and move out. It wasn't safe for me to live in that apartment anymore. I needed to get away. Part 8. I went to Reagan's apartment as she was the closest person I had to family while I was abroad. She gave me refuge while listening to me retell the last 48 miserable hours of my life. She reassured me that I could stay with her as I held back tears, and my phone buzzed. Sam texted that she needed help and to go to the apartment ASAP. I was hesitant to go back in there, but I couldn't just abandon Sam. So I grabbed my stuff and told Reagan I'd be back soon. I walked to my apartment and stared up at it, feeling a lot like the priest in the Exorcist movie. When I got to my door, I was immediately greeted by my 3 roommates' distraught faces. I followed them into the apartment, and my eyes grew wide as Sam pushed open the kitchen door to reveal a truly demonic sight. Huge amounts of congealed red and orange liquid pooled across the floor leading beneath our table, where a small bird lay dead with its wings outstretched and its head missing. I felt sick. The windows don't open, so it didn't get in here by itself. Nellie had either found this bird and brought it into the kitchen, or she killed and decapitated a living bird and then put it in the kitchen. I don't like either of those options. I assured my roommates that I would report Nellie that night, and that's exactly what I did. I spoke to the school safety board, and things moved fast. I discovered that Nellie had lied to us about her name and age. Officials in hazmat suits came to clean the kitchen and Nellie's room. The board had me send them photos of myself daily in case Nellie killed me and they had to identify me. I quickly moved out, and since Nellie avoided the other girls, they decided to stay. I declined to submit Nellie for expulsion because I felt bad for her, and I thought that moving would stop her obsession with me. I was incredibly misguided. Part 9. I was happy that my new roommates were normal, and no Nellie incidents had happened for 2 weeks. I did have a large uptick in random daily Facebook and Instagram follower requests from blank profile users. I knew who was behind this, but I was avoiding any Nellie-related thoughts. I was having night terrors, and the more I thought about her, the worse they got. I blocked another user as I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte in an almost empty lecture hall. Charlotte nudged me as Nellie entered the room, bypassing her usual seat. I felt myself freeze up as she entered our row and began walking towards me, staring at me with her dead eyes. "Don't fucking sit next to me," I said, shocked by my bravery. Nellie responded by sitting 10 seats down from me, not breaking eye contact, and I considered that a win. After class, I went home and walked to the store. I forgot to grab a cart, so I quickly turned around to fetch one and ran into someone standing directly behind me. It was Nellie. Did she follow me from my apartment? Does she know where I live? My heart stopped as I backed into another aisle and Nellie followed. I walked to another aisle, but Nellie followed me, matching my pace until I went to another aisle and she began to run. I ran away terrified, and Nellie only stopped when I got to the security desk. Security offered to call the police, but I declined and gave them my email to send me the footage of Nellie chasing me. I had to report Nellie, but since I still had class that day, I decided to report her the next day. 2 hours later, as I waited for Reagan to walk with me to class, I caught Nellie staring at me from across the street. But she didn't approach me. She walked with the crowd towards campus. Minutes later, Reagan found me and we headed to class together. I walked beside Reagan, past the buildings and alleyways until a rock caught in my shoe and I bent down to fix it. Reagan switched to the right side of me to look at a billboard, and when I removed the rock, we began walking again. I turned my head to speak when Nellie jumped out of an alleyway and onto Reagan. Her hands were outstretched and clasped around Reagan's neck. Words can't explain how terrified I was. Nellie let go immediately and Reagan grabbed my arm, walking forward. Nellie began walking shoulder to shoulder with me, her head turned sideways at an unnatural angle. The look in her eyes was not human. Reagan told me to run and we bolted across the street. Nellie paused but walked away, traffic stopping her from crossing. We stopped and Reagan leaned against the fence as I bent over and covered my mouth, trying not to vomit. After a while, we continued our walk to class in silence. We made it to the lobby and headed for the staircase, but Nellie stood at the bottom of it. "I won't let her walk behind me," I said, voice shaken. Reagan nodded and we followed a large crowd after Nellie walked upstairs, only to find her holding the door open for everyone. Nellie stared at me through the crowd until everyone but Reagan and I had passed through. "It's okay, you can go first," Reagan said while smiling at Nellie. I was shocked at how composed she was, and even more shocked that Nellie listened. When we sat down in class, Nellie tried to sit behind me, but someone was saving the seat for his friend, so Nellie left. I didn't pay any attention to that lecture. I sat there shocked and terrified, while Reagan hunched low in her seat, rubbing her neck. I felt horrible for bringing Reagan into this Nellie crap. I knew then that Nellie needed to be expelled no matter what. Part 10. The next day, I reported Nellie to the Student Safety Board, and they raised the issue to the Disciplinary Board. I submitted a lengthy report detailing everything Nellie had done. I included Reagan, Bella, Poppy, and Sam as witnesses, and gave photographic evidence of the threats, the cause, the smeared poop and blood, clogged showers and toilets, and the stalking. The next week, I met with the disciplinary board to go over their conclusions. They informed me that they had reviewed my report, met with Nellie and gave her a copy of my report, discussed my accusations, and had come to a conclusion. They acknowledged that everything I reported was factual, but that they didn't think that Nellie had any malicious intent. So they would grant a no-contact order, but Nellie wouldn't be expelled. I was completely perplexed by their conclusion and asked them what Nellie had said about all this, but they refused to tell me anything. I was at a loss for words. I couldn't believe Nellie was given my full report, knew everything that I said, and knew the witnesses' names. The school put us all in danger. Yet they wouldn't allow me to know if Nellie had even denied these actions. I was devastated. I felt my mind go numb. I knew at that moment that they didn't care. They were going to prioritize a predator. So, with no other option, I agreed to the no-contact order. The worker tried to get me to sign a non-disclosure agreement so that I wouldn't speak about what Nellie did to me or how the school dealt with my case, but I refused to sign it. The next day, I received an email confirmation that Nellie had agreed to the no-contact order, but I knew that meant nothing. Nellie wouldn't get help, and she would never stop stalking me. Part 11. My sophomore year was plagued by a relentless pattern of Nellie stalking me from place to place, sitting next to me in class, standing next to me in hallways, and staring at me daily. Her actions were so unnerving and obvious that multiple strangers warned me about her. I reported these incidents every time they occurred, and the school always responded by stating that they would remind Nellie of the no-contact order. They never took any further steps to help me. In sophomore year, Nellie found other roommates, and in them, new victims. She was evicted from an off-campus apartment, and her new roommates, who once sat with her, began to sit far away from Nellie. They looked terrified. They looked like me. Having incidents happen weekly and having to see Nellie daily made it impossible for me to move on. I was always in flight or freeze mode, terrified by what Nellie had done and still might do to me. I became a sunken-in, miserable, and defeated version of myself. I wanted revenge, a natural result of a boiling rage I felt, now a constant simmer after Nellie was coddled by a university that failed to shell out even a minor consequence for the terror that she imposed on me. I wanted Nellie to suffer in the exact same way she made me suffer. I know if I had just grown a pair at any point in these early months, I likely could have saved myself and others from suffering. Nellie was likely stalking me from the moment I met her. I just hadn't realized it, and it weighs heavily on me to know that I played a large part in my own suffering. No matter what I write, I can't begin to recreate the evil that radiated off of Nellie. I have daily night terrors, I don't go into new situations, I don't speak to new people, and I don't make friends. I'm not nice to strangers because I don't want to invite something like this into my life again. Revenge came on graduation day, when Nellie's name didn't appear in the book of graduates. She had failed second year, but despite everything, I couldn't help but think that I was the bad person for being content with Nellie's failure. Maybe I was just happy that I could finally move on. And that is all I have for you this week. I hope you enjoyed this little, true, spooky, scary story type of deal. We'll be back to regular murder next week. So let's do it again. Same time, same place, next Wednesday. See you then.
That's how my mama murdered a podcast.